So digital ethnography involves this experimentation aspect on the production side. So one of the things we're always trying to do is try to convey the blooming, buzzing complexity of life in some interesting way. And what that means is usually trying to really connect the audience with what's happening almost like sensorially, like, I mean, that's the beauty of magnifying the tools that we're using, right? And like leveraging all these different tools is really to think about like, how can you draw the viewer into an experience, not just like, so it's not just like conveying information, which is like more like a standard documentary kind of thing, but really like getting in. So that's on the production side. On the research side, digital ethnography involves, there's actually like practice of using digital tools and then analyzing videos and text and photos and audio all together, right? And that's different than, say, traditional ethnography, which is mostly like field notes and then analyzing field notes. So it's both different on the research side and on the production side. That's a really dramatic story in my life, actually. It started with, I'd been in New Guinea for, I think, 4 years. And all the while, like, I knew that there were there was a school 7 days walk away. And so some young guys had been walking to this school. And over the course of 20 years, they had finally gotten to, say, like 10th grade, and they were literate. And they started coming back and living then in the village. And there was about 10 guys. And they came back with, one of them was a government officer, an official government officer. He actually had a job. So they came back with books. They came back with census books. They came back with like a command from the government to census the people, map them, map the villages, and also bring law to this area. And this was the first time any of that had really happened in this particular area. So I actually watched the first census, I watched the first mapping, and what was so surprising was that there were all kinds of effects that were traumatic, I mean very traumatic, on the culture. And I started thinking like, what kind of traumatic effects might be occurring in our society as we change media. And people don't realize that like when a new communications technology comes into a culture, the results are usually traumatic actually, and often violent. So I mean you can look at like say the history of writing in Europe, for example. And one way is to say like, oh, it's the dawn of the Enlightenment. Well, let's not forget the 30 Years' War. Let's not forget the witch hunts. Those were all very much embedded with the rise of literacy. Like those things don't happen without the rise of literacy. Nation building as we know it and the fight over borders don't happen without mapping and literacy, putting stuff on paper, right? So there's a certain violence that goes along with it. Any moment in which you start representing the world in new ways and it becomes contested, and that's what's happening with digital media. Like there's a wide open challenge to how will this new world look, and it will be violent, and maybe it won't be like blood all the time, but there's a shakedown of economics going on right now, and we're seeing like a rise of the uber wealthy. There's a lot of stuff happening that can be tied back in some way to this, digital revolution. Sounds exactly right to me. And that's true like with all digital media, I think, and that's exactly, I think ultimately, the exciting thing about digital media from the beginning was that, the tools were getting cheaper, the distribution was getting cheaper to zero cost essentially, and that was just very, very exciting. And all the critiques we had had of television culture, that it's one way, that it's geared towards the masses, that it has to always be entertaining to entertain the masses. Like you go on and on with that critique of television, and new media sort of offered this thing that says, look, like it doesn't have to be that way. Like we can, subvert all of those and come up, we make our own media. That's very exciting. The machine is using us, for example. That was that started as a PowerPoint presentation to my colleagues. And it was just like, oh, here's a tour of Web 2.0. Like, here's blogs and here's videos. And, you know, it's just like, and actually, like, when I see the machine is using us, I can still see the slides, you know, that eventually became. And what it was is like this frustration of like, you know, like I tell them about a blog or something, and like they're not actually going to get it. You have to like really experience it. And so then I thought, well, I can make a video. And so then it was just started off as like almost like a PSA, you know, like it was boring, you know, and it was just like, here it is. But as I was working on it, all these other thoughts that I'd been sitting on for a couple years about the real implications of it started to surface. But if you asked me, like, how long did it take me to make that video? One of the answers is like about 2 seconds. I had this like wonderful inside view of how the early Web 2.0 media all sort of linked together. And mostly just by watching my video go viral, I was able to see that, you know, and I studied it carefully, you know, so I, you know, I see like my video like getting lots of views, and I wonder what's happening. I go to Dig and I see, okay, that's where it's being linked. And then you like go out from Dig and you find the first blog post and you realize like, okay, the blogosphere's, you know, feeding this, and so Technorati's counting the blog links, and then it gets into the top 20, and then once it's in the top 20, everybody starts watching it because they're just watching the top 20. And so all these different websites are, you know, linked in a mediascape, and then it takes off. And so then I remember, like, you know, just all of a sudden, I was amazed at how many people found something that resonated with them in that video from many different walks of life and different perspectives. I had Luddites championing it as like, yeah, the machine is using us, you know, and I had, you know, sort of like the people who are super into technology saying like, yeah, technology is going to solve all our problems. And, you know, and both sides are asking me to come talk at their conferences. Technology obviously is one of those things that bridges across everything, and everybody's going to use it in different ways. And on the downside of all that, even though we can make our own media and all that, we haven't had the utopian visions that people thought might occur. Twitter can be very empowering and can be a part of revolutions, but it can also be part of, you know, dictatorship, pulling down control, and using Twitter to identify dissidents, you know. So there's like kind of two sides to this. I remember watching Twitter turn green. I don't know if you remember this, but like this was like a show of solidarity with Iranians who were tweeting out and saying like, look, the media is not covering this, the local media is shut down, turn your profile green to show support, and like let's let the world know what's happening in Iran. And you know, so everybody, Twitter goes green. It's amazing, and everything that was trending at that time was important in some way. You know, it was the Iranian thing. There were conferences going on. There was battles over net neutrality, all kinds of stuff. This is what was trending, right? I remember in those early days of Twitter, for like the first 2 or 3 years of Twitter, it felt like everything mattered, and I thought, I had this idea, like, this is what happens when media comes into our hands. We start tagging what's important, we start sharing news that's important, and, you know, this is gonna be it. Like, this is, you know, the whole critique of TV is true, and everything's gonna be fine. And then Michael Jackson died during the Iranian thing, and Michael Jackson at the top. And then next thing I know, like, I look at the Twitter trending, and it's all like Michael Jackson, Justin Bieber, and it got so bad that there was now nothing important in the top. And to this day, there's really, I mean, it's fun, but it's rare that there's anything like real substantial there that trends. And I remember it got so bad that like Justin Bieber was at the top every day. And Twitter finally was just like, you know what, let's mix things up a bit here so we don't always have Bieber at the top. Right. So they actually banned Bieber. So then all the Beliebers, they all got together and they started like just changing like one letter in Bieber so that it would show up, and they'd all agree like at the beginning of the day, like, okay, what's the word going to be today? And they'd get it to trend. Like, and then you realize like, okay, if social media is going to be some powerful reflection of the masses, you've got to educate the masses. I'm not a determinist, though I do think that people shy away from understanding just how powerful technologies are by drawing out the, like, well, I'm not going to be a determinist card. I'm like, no, you know, technologies do have inherent biases. Each one, like, each medium shapes what can be said, how it can be said, who can say it, who can hear it. Now I say it shapes. It doesn't determine, but it definitely shapes it. You cannot write you know, a great novel in smoke signals. You just can't do it. You know, like, smoke signals have a certain, it's a medium, and certain things can be said and certain things can't be said through smoke signals. That's an extreme example. But now you go through, like, texting, Twitter, Facebook, whatever it is. All of these different technologies have different constraints and different possibilities. They enable some kinds of communication while disabling others. People like McLuhan suggested that the Nazi movement rose on radio, right? And you know, but the important point about that is, again, to get outside of the determinism there, right? And say, like, okay, the Nazis did use radio very effectively to create that movement, but there are different ways to use radio, and it didn't happen in the U.S. And instead, in the U.S., we got, like, fireside chats. Sure. And fireside chats, you know, for whatever you may say, there's a different kind of propaganda, and it built a different kind of community. There's these algorithms at work, right, that are shaping what we see. So when I search Google, I see different things than what you see. When I'm on Facebook, I see different things than you see, obviously. And it's not just, like, based on who my friends are, but even, like, within my friend groups, I'm not seeing, you know, the stuff that I'm politically against and so on. So I'm not encountering a diversity of ideas. But what we're really getting at is the power of algorithms, and boy, they are powerful. And it's a thing that I think people are becoming more aware of right now, but the general public is still not so aware of it. I mean, the general public is still on social media. But if you're, like, really looking at, like, drivers of our culture, algorithms are just, I mean, you know, almost 80% of trades on Wall Street are algorithms. You know, over 60% of what we see is dictated by algorithms. What's produced in Hollywood, what albums get produced, those are all shaped by algorithms because, you know, producers are actually using algorithms to decide what to produce. So, I mean, these become drivers of culture, and whatever we are putting into those algorithms ultimately are going to shape culture fairly profoundly. And when I think of, like, the machine is using us, that's really the beginning, and I think what was not very well framed in that video would be, like, the power of the algorithm. It's kind of there, because it's implicitly there. You know, in the line from Kevin Kelly, which I quote in that video, where he says that we teach the web with every link, search, tag, note. Everything you do on the web, like, feeds into the algorithm. But the algorithm's always changing, and, you know, even, like, say, like, and it's not the algorithm, obviously, right? But if you look at, like, Google or something, like, they're always changing the secret sauce, and it really does shape, like, what you see. And there's this other side of, like, how this is now coming into the world itself, right? So it's not just that almost everything has a URL associated with it. And by that I mean, like, if an object has an RFID tag on it, and, you know, there's like 500 billion RFID tags put into circulation every year, and those are all URLs in a sense. Like, those are digitally identified, and or, you know, two-dimensional barcodes and stuff like that. Those are all, that's bringing into the world. But even more powerfully is just the way that all kinds of automation are coming into our world. Very likely within the next 10 years or so, we could see self-driven cars actually on the roads. And that's going to be a very interesting cultural battle, because people actually enjoy driving. And there's a lot of fear involved in allowing a machine to drive. And I think there's going to be some big compromises there. So this is, again, like, where you come back to technological determinism being a little bit faulty, right? Because you can't just say, like, yeah, this technology is going to exist and therefore it will take over. No, it's going to be deeply cultural in how it is adopted. There may be some cultures out there where it does take off and nobody drives and cars start being designed as living rooms on wheels. But that's going to be deeply cultural, and I think the U.S. especially, with their love affair of cars, is not going to let go easily of the steering wheel. Technologically, it's actually not that hard to understand what's coming. I mean, technologically, we're just going to keep moving more and more towards ubiquity, ubiquitous computing, ubiquitous networks, ubiquitous information. It's going to be moving at unlimited speed, on multiple devices that are going to transcend our notion of what a device is. You know, it'll be, I mean, technologically, it can already be embedded into your clothing and into doors and into, you know, it's everywhere. It can be anywhere. So that's where I think it becomes, the technology actually, in a way, starts to disappear. I think we're already at the moment where Facebook is disappearing as technology. You know, technology just tends to be like whatever occurred in the last 10 years. And I think more and more, like when we have students coming to our classes who view Facebook as they do water, you know, I mean, it's just something that's been there, and it's always been there, and it's not that interesting. It starts to disappear. As somebody who cares about people being aware of how technologies might be using them, that concerns me. And at the same time, I think we might be moving to a phase where technologies actually disappear much more quickly. It's not a 10-year gap anymore, but it's just like, I don't know, maybe digital technology just doesn't seem so bizarre anymore. On the other hand, there's the other vision, like this, more like the Ray Kurzweil vision, which is like, you know, Moore's law holds up for, say, 15 more years. It doesn't take much longer for Moore's law to hold up. If Moore's law holds up for 15 more years, we could have very powerful chips operating at the nanoscale, and you could have essentially very tiny robots, like the size of cells, that you could inject into your body, and they would fight disease, and they could, as he says, go into your visual cortex and flip you into a virtual reality, and you wouldn't have to carry a device because you could just like have these robots inside you, and they could be integrated somehow with your bodily functions, and then you have like true cyborgs, right, that are also somehow very human in a way, but very bizarre stuff. Sci-fi is actually a pretty good place to start when you start like thinking Web 4, Web 5. What does all that look like? Learning is really about communication, empathy, and thoughtfulness. Relationships are about communication, empathy, and thoughtfulness, and they are mutually co-creating one another in a way. And so the better you communicate with somebody, the more empathy you can grow for them because you listen to them and you understand them. And to gain more empathy, empathy is the ability to see your way into somebody else's perspective, which takes a lot of thoughtfulness, meaning like you have to have understandings of the world, theories about how the world works, and as you have those theories about the world works, that allows you to imagine your way into their perspective. And then as you have more empathy, you can communicate better. If you have to communicate better, you learn more and you become more thoughtful. So that there's like a virtuous cycle running two ways here: communication, thoughtfulness, and more empathy; empathy, more thoughtfulness, and communication, and so on. So that's why I put that at the core of what I teach.